So let's move on. We talked about ranked choice voting and some reasons why it's good, and a simple example of how ranked choice voting works. But this always talked about electing one person, and it turns out that when we're talking about legislatures, when we're talking about bodies that write laws, so the House and Senate, most states have a House and Senate, right? In addition to Congress. Um, when we talk about legislative bodies, we still kind of run into this issue of gerrymandering, where even if you have the ranked choice and it's more policy focused, election, and you get a better, more compromised candidate and things, you're still taking a large district of people, which could be thousands and thousands of people, and reducing it down to one person and saying this one person is going to represent that district. And even if that person is a pretty decent choice, there's still going to be large segments of that district, communities within that district, that are not really well represented by that person. Even if they overall represent pretty well, still won't necessarily represent all the members of their community. And there's a kind of fix to this. There's a way to address that, and that's known as proportional representation. In particular, if we use proportional representation with multi-member districts instead of single. So this means each district would elect multiple people at once instead of just a single person. And if you do it that way, then there's a greater chance that at least one of the people that gets elected is going to represent your interest. Maybe they won't all, but at least one of them is going to represent you. And because of that, we can be pretty confident that all the communities in the district, or at least almost all of them, get at least some representation in the system, which is of course the goal we're going for. That every community is heard, that every community has the ability to participate and influence the system and the results, and not just be locked out of the system because they didn't get enough votes or whatever it is, right? So let's talk a little bit more about the details. Oops, sorry, I hit next with you. So I think I already talked about this slide a little bit. Sorry, I'm kind of getting ahead of myself.
Yeah, I'll jump in on it too.
Yeah, go ahead.
Because the question is ranked choice enough? And as an Illinoisan, my unquestionable answer is no. Right, and what I tell people that advocate for ranked choice and ranked choice alone here in Illinois is it's not going to change anything. It's not going to change anything in our general elections, because you're only going to be able to rank a Republican and a Democrat. Our ballot access laws are as such that only Republicans and Democrats really have a serious chance of getting on the ballot in most partisan races. And so that means that when if Illinois were to implement ranked choice voting alone and no other, democracy reforms, it would basically be a veneer of legitimacy on a system that's still completely illegitimate. So, the answer to that is definitely, no, it's not enough. And so, and this idea of multi-member districts is something that in Illinois, again, it's definitely treated like it's radical, but we used to have it, and the Democrats were who took it away. Then there were problems with our multi-member district. It wasn't the greatest of systems, but Illinois used to elect multiple members from each district, and that system was abolished for a first past the vote post single member district by the Democratic Party, and they used cutting the budget as a way to do it. If we have less legislators, we have to pay them less. So that's a big part of it. So how do we, what else can we do if ranked choice voting isn't enough? Like we've said, one way to address this is to elect multiple candidates from each district. And like Garrett said, that means it's far more likely that at least somebody will represent closer to your interests. And it gives us a broader diversity of winners that reflects the diversity of the community. There's a few ways to do it. We can do single transferable vote, which focuses on individual candidates, basically Maryland has this. In Maryland's House of Delegates, they elect 3. It was cut in the 90s, Christopher Brown, and so it's single. And Maryland has this. So in their House of Delegates, they elect 3 members for each district, and the top 3 in the election win. And while it hasn't led to a green state legislator in Maryland yet, last time we made a serious run at it in the Baltimore area, we got 4th and 5th. right? So we were just on the cusp with both of our candidates. And that still maintains kind of the single candidate, individualistic, mindset of the election. It still maintains that kind of Americanness of it, to do it that way. And then there's also party lists, which are common elsewhere in the world, where you vote and it counts towards a party, not just a candidate. And then the parties chooses. They literally have a list. And if they win 45% of the vote, they go down, and 45% of their candidates are elected. It's the simple way to think about that. And then there's mixed member proportional, which combines ranked choice and the party list. England does this, where you vote both for a person and for a party. And it's kind of that middle ground, right? Once again, like what we said earlier, there's not necessarily a best method. There's trade-offs on all of them, and we can actually, the cool thing about this is this kind of stuff is often treated like it's, radical theory, but all of it's in practice, right? Here in the United States, we can see multi-member districts. And we can see, if we look through the history of the United States, we can see lots of iterations of ranked choice voting, of multi-member districts, of proportional representation. When we look around the world, we can see huge numbers of, different types of proportional representation, to create multi-party democracies, which is,
here I'm going to jump a couple slides ahead.
Yeah.
Because that's a point here that, like Chris said, it's treated as this kind of theoretical thing, or that would never really work. But the truth is, half of the world's countries are already using some form of proportional representation, and we give a few different options, and there's legitimate debates to have over which one might be the best to use, especially local level versus state level and things like that. But the point is, already, like, most of the world uses some form of proportional representation, which kind of by extension means some form of ranked choice voting. So, for example, most of the countries in Europe and South America use some form of party list. Germany and New Zealand use the mixed member proportional that we talked about. Australia uses single transferable vote. So, these are already being used in practice and successfully today. These countries all, not trying to say that they're perfect and that they can't be improved upon and reformed and things like that, but they certainly have far more robust multi-party democratic systems than the US does. So we know in practice that this works pretty well. And so we could do at least as good as them. And if we're advocating for the right reforms, we can even, have a much better democracy than what they're talking about. And the interesting thing, like Chris was hitting on here, is that the US itself used to use proportional representation in many places, especially at the local level. It actually, this wouldn't even be new to the US. Proportional representation
came about because the people were trying to stop party bosses from running things, right? And it's the exact same dynamic we have right now, right? That in a century ago led to a growth of proportional representation and single transferable votes and different voting systems, and then the success of it, of electing representatives, then led to the backlash where those with power realized this is actually a threat, right? if we're using these systems, we don't it's not as easy for us to control things. It's not as easy for us to maintain the oligarchy, and so we saw a pushback and even getting into federal law. So it's the history of this type of voting in the United States is historical proof that the things that advocates say will happen. And that's literally why we don't have it anymore.
We partly ended up with this system of primaries and things because the folks in power realized that they could control primaries, but they could kind of wave it out there as a carrot, like, oh, we'll just give you more say in our primary process. Just go along with that, because to them, they could control that a lot better than they could ranked choice and proportional voting. And then they use things like the Red Scare, fear of socialism and communism and things, in order to try to convince people that it was better to have a primary system than it was to have this. But there's no reason that we can't do it again, and in fact, we should take some inspiration from history about how proportional representation was put into place in a lot of cities throughout the U.S. And it's particularly happened in kind of like heavily unionized towns, along the Rust Belt and things like that, where you would have community movements that would use ballot initiatives, ballot referendums, in order to force this issue, force it on the ballot, and force the change the laws necessary to create proportional representation, because they knew that the party bosses weren't going to allow them to, to put forward their own candidates and have a chance at winning. And they did that. They were successful at the referendums. They got it in place, and by using proportional representation, this goes back to the late 1800s and all. When they got it in place, some of the first, women and black people and all that were elected in U.S. history were elected before they even technically had the right to vote under this ridiculous system. They were elected because the communities voted for them in proportional systems, and they were allowed to win because those proportional systems actually create better democracy. They actually reflect the communities. They actually, reflect our interests, as opposed to, the duopoly, plurality, one vote system and all that we have in place today. So we know that this works, and we can use that as kind of a template of how we can try to drive it forward today, to get it back in place and to get it expanded much more than what happened at that time period.
And it was also the heyday of an actual left in this country, right? The destruction of ranked choice voting and proportional systems is probably a small part of the repression of the left in the United States. The Red Scare and all that kinds of stuff that's mentioned on the slide is obviously a huge part of it. But this system also allowed the left to be elected. It allowed socialists to be elected into power, and when they were is when we saw a lot of the massive labor reforms, improvements of working conditions. A lot of our basic human rights laws. Came out of this time, and that was possible because a more representative government was elected.
And you could see residue of this still in a few cities, like Minneapolis still today uses ranked choice, and that's kind of a relic from this era, that community movements got that put in place. So again, we should look to history here to try to give us some ideas on how we can organize for this change in the future, because we know that the duopoly and the powerful are going to resist us on this stuff. So that's a way to drive forward at the grassroots levels.